in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A Boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com. We got a question last week from one of our top fans. That's Chief Pete, who is repping the Air National Guard. We appreciate his support throughout the whole Tactical Tangents podcast, and we generally appreciate the support of all our National Guard brethren who listen to us and follow us. So thank you guys. So Chief Pete asked us to talk about work-life balance. And boy, do we have some things to say about it.
I've got some notes. Just a couple.
Yeah. Let me know if you get it figured out. Figured out from there. Yeah. So when I think about it, like the big idea that strikes me is there is a level of imbalance between work and life that is normal and expected when you start out in a career and when you start out in a special team. You need that in order to learn and adapt to the new environment and learn all of the things that you need to, and frankly, to do the amount of work expected from you to start earning your keep on a team, right? But
there's a curve.
But no one can or should do that sprint forever. At some point, you're going to need to make some decisions. And particularly when we talk about special teams, special operations, special weapons and tactics, canine, air, whatever, special teams are special. They take a special level of commitment, and you might be a very special snowflake, but that doesn't mean you're the right special snowflake for the special teams in this context. It's not for everyone, and it isn't for everyone forever. Right? You might be good at that sprint, but that doesn't mean you need to stay in that sprint for 20 years. You need to be honest with yourself about that before you volunteer. And you need to be honest with yourself throughout your time on the team.
And I think it's important to recognize that it is absolutely a marathon and not a sprint in a lot of cases. There are times that you sprint and that you have to pick up the pace, but you still have to pace yourself. At the end of the day, you've got to regulate that a little bit, or you're never going to finish the race. And on Jim's notion that the special teams are kind of special, right? One of the things that make them special is the level of dedication and commitment of the members, right? The members of the team having that level of excellence and professionalism. Those are positive attributes that contribute to success in those places. But we also, when we talk about this balance that we're discussing, have to acknowledge the importance of institutional knowledge and continuity. If you are so into it that you feel like you always have to be the guy that solves all the problems, the guy that does all the things, instead of leading and building up the next generation of guys, you aren't doing the team or the profession or the special group, whatever, any favors. And that's a pet peeve of mine. I see people who really want the glory. They want to be in the spotlight. They want to feel important. And I get it. At some point, you want to be able to say that you've been there and done that. You want to be able to prove to yourself that you could cash the check that you've written, right? That you've done the thing. And I understand that. And I know that you want to see the value of your work. But you also have to be willing and able to step back a little bit as you mature. And a lot of the ego side of this is we get accustomed to being the guy, the one who solves the problems, the one who's like the go-to, the one, the quote unquote, the one the cops call for help, right? That's cool. And I get it, but you will not always be that guy. And it's important to not leave a vacuum when you do finally decide to step away, or importantly, when you're forced to. Part of the leadership and self-awareness side of this is understanding that gradually fading away is part of it, and that's okay.
So there's a great movie quote about this from Highlander, nerdy movie from the 80s, where he's like, I just want to say it's better to burn out than to fade away. That might be a good episode name. I don't know. Or a terrible one, right? Like, it's one thing if it's a movie, and like bad movies and television create a culture that maybe isn't really what we need, right? With a lot of this stuff. When I think about this from a military perspective, the military is a young person's job by design. We want the bulk of the military to be 18 to 24 years old. We want them young. We want them slightly pissed off. We want them energetic. And we don't want them to have a whole lot of outside distractions. One of my little things of mentoring that I tell the youngins is, during this phase of your career, a young enlisted troop should not have more kids than stripes, or cars than stripes, or wives than stripes. No, the distractions are not going to help you. Right? This is a full commitment job, and we need all of your attention on this for your safety and for the safety of your teammates. Now, does that mean that you can't be married and have a job? Well, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. But like, maybe you don't need to get married at age 20, right? And you don't need to get married at age 20 as you're going into SEAL training. That's not a smart combination of situations to be in, right?
And just knowing that in a military job, you're going to be bouncing around all over the country or all over the world and gone for extended lengths of time. What we see is a lot of really young guys in that 18 to 24 window that go out into the military, and they go off and they get sucked into that situation really, really young. There's a reason that those often don't pan out well, right? And it's because the balance is not set up in your favor, really.
Or in that spouse's favor, right? If you get married early and you pull her or him out of their social support network and their routine and their hobbies and their family and relocate them to Japan or Germany or Korea, it will probably be a really neat experience for them, but you're also really going to mess up their routine, right? Yeah. And not everyone's going to adapt to that well. On top of, you're trying to get established in your job, right?
Right. Especially in those young years. Now, public safety careers are a little bit different. They generally are not that way by design. There are positions or assignments within those careers that might be, but really they are intended to be 20 or 30 year civil service progressions. And what young people in those careers need to recognize is that we ought to embrace the arc that is embedded in that design. And it's crazy because you won't realize it until it's already happened, but at some point you'll sit back and you'll watch yourself become the old guy. And there's a really strong need to be introspective about that. Instead of what often happens is the attitude among those quote unquote old guys ends up being about like the kids these days. Oh, this younger generation of cops, X, Y, and Z. And there's some give and take in that. Like the world and the career and the profession, it's going to evolve, right? But think about how important your role can be as the old guy to give back and share the things that you've learned and positively impact the future of your profession. So it's part of that arc, and I think we should embrace that a little bit.
Yeah, if they're your kids and your kids are jerks, that's maybe not the kid's fault. Maybe that's your fault because you let them get that way, right? Take some ownership for the people you're responsible for. Consider also on the military side, not every job in the military is that 18 to 24-year-old job. There are many, many jobs in the giant U.S. military that are absolutely careers, right? You're in for 20 years. That's traditionally how long you're in if you're trying to get the pension. For guys and gals who are in it for a career, who are in it for 20, there needs to be at least a little compromise or it gets silly fast.
So you're saying you can cross-train and bounce around and take steps back as needed.
Yes, and you can go home at the end of the workday and you don't have to stay, if your typical office day is 7:30 to 4:30, maybe you don't have to stay until 7 every night. Maybe you can do that in a sprint, but you maybe don't have to do it for years at a time. And if you do, let me tell you how that family situation is going to go. I've seen it. I've experienced it, right? And there's a saying I learned from one of the most sneaky intelligence operatives I've ever come across. True, legit American hero, badass. And she told me, you can be anything, but you can't be everything. And specifically, and I don't want to mischaracterize, she's talking about women specifically. Like, a woman can be anything but can't be everything. I leave it to our listeners to decide whether that's gendered or not, or whatever. But at some point, you have to decide how you want to structure your adulthood. A lot of people just kind of like let life happen to them. You can't afford that in a really high commitment job. You've got to be kind of deliberate about it. Do you want to be married at age 30 or age 40 or age 50? Do you want kids? Do you want hobbies? Do you want a nice house? Do you want to travel? You need to make those decisions relatively early as you go into these jobs, because that's going to drive whether you try out for the special teams or whether you do 2 years on the special teams and then you go to something else, or whether you're in the military for 5 years and then you go to the private sector and go work at a bank. That is a choice that I want you to make and not let life make for you.
Yeah, just letting life happen to you is something that you have to take some ownership of, right? You don't get to just be a passenger. Well, you can be a passenger, but that's on you, right? Don't be a passenger. And a lot of this really requires you to sit down and think about what your vision is and what you want life to look like in the big picture, kind of like Jim is saying, all those questions, right? And I hate to be the guy that brings up all that squishy stuff, but this boils down to goal setting, really. At the end of the day, what are your goals? And if your only goals are career-oriented, then that's fine. But you have to make sure that you're framing your life around that and recognize that those will probably change at various points in your career, right? So figure out what your vision is in life and work backwards from there. And the thing is, especially when we're young, we're often distracted by 5-meter targets. And I use 5-meter targets as a term that I got from an article that someone wrote about leadership. And I think this is an important leadership topic we've talked about before. A lot of people who work in management or those positional leadership roles, they're often just chasing one crisis to the next. And they're never looking more than 5 or 10 yards down range. And I think that's also true for people who are young and new and excited about getting the job and getting hired and getting through the academy or boot camp or whatever. And then they get to test for those special assignments, or they're in the running for a promotion. And sure, there's real payoffs in achieving those things. But you will probably, hopefully, outlive those assignments and those teams and hopefully your entire career. And so you really need to sit down and think about if that is all there is to it, or if you need to do some other kind of on the margins goal setting to help keep you in line for that big picture. On that happy note about outliving your career, there's an episode that we did last year sometime with a sleep expert. He has a lot of experience working with naval special warfare guys, and I met him at a human performance workshop that I did. His name is Dr. Paul Sargent, and that episode, the interview that we did with him, got a lot of good feedback, so I think I would encourage you to go check it out. One of the things, when I went to that workshop, one of the things that he talked about that was very prominent in his class to me was an exchange between him and one of the firefighters that was attending. And this fire guy was talking about how, he's working 24-hour shifts. He gets off, he's getting off around 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. He gets home. It's a Saturday. Kids have soccer games and all these things. And so he's kind of just got to roll right into the next day. And these are all things that he doesn't want to miss. His kids are only going to be young one time. And he only gets one shot at being a dad, and he doesn't want to mess those things up. He doesn't want to miss those things. And that's obviously very reasonable and respectable. And those of us who are parents can appreciate that sentiment, right? But Dr. Sargent made a very compelling point in this class about the importance of sleep as it relates to people who work in those kinds of jobs. And he said, yeah, I understand you don't want to miss those things, and I get it. But if you want to see your kids grow old, if you want to get to a point where they grow up and they have their own families and you want to be able to remember them when you get old, then you need to get better sleep. You need to make that a priority. That doesn't mean you have to miss all their games, but if you had a rough shift or you didn't get a lot of sleep that night, you need to be able to have a courageous conversation with your family about those priorities and help them understand how big of a deal it is to squeeze the rest in there, even if it means it comes at the expense of missing some of those events from time to time. And he went on to explain in his class how sleep issues in the careers that we're talking about, that Jim and I are discussing here, are significant enough that the World Health Organization, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, have classified shift work as a Class 2A carcinogen. There's specific associations to shift work with increased risk of breast, prostate, and colon cancer, and probably some others. And the World Health Organization and the International Labor Organization also published research about the connection of long working hours and night shifts to other health issues that include, and this is among a list, right? This is just some of them, but increased risk of stroke, heart attack, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, mental illness, and all-cause mortality. In other words, you are more likely, your risk of dying from literally anything else that you might face in your life is higher if you work long hours and night shifts where your sleep is compromised. And for all the people out there that have something political to say about organizations like the World Health Organization, that research has been corroborated by other entities, right? The British Journal of Nursing has talked about it. The CDC has corroborated it. This is not anything new. It's been very well documented that sleep, lack of sleep, those kinds of issues are bad for your health. It's a big problem.
There is more to the shift thing also, which is very often when you're doing weird shift work, you're eating weird food at weird times. You're living out of the Circle K or the 7-Eleven, right? And there's all the things that go with that just contribute. They just stack up on top of the sleep problems.
Yeah. I mean, it's hormone secretion, nutrient, what's the word? Not consumption, but
deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, right?
Sure. I mean, there's a bunch of cognitive risks, right? But also just your ability to absorb nutrients and all these things. I mean, there's so many things that get affected by this.
Yeah. So I want to hit on the sleep thing specifically because it is a clear, measurable indicator of your work-life balance. It's a clue that you got a problem, right? And one of the things that you can kind of get away with in your 20s that you can't get away with in your 30s and 40s, right? Young person's job, things you can get away with in that initial career sprint, maybe you shouldn't be doing 10, 15, 20 years into your career. My Army friends in particular take this like weird pride in how long they can go without sleep. It's stupid. It's dangerous. People literally get stupid when they get sleep deprived. That's not smart. I've fallen asleep at the wheel and crashed a car. I could have killed somebody, including myself. I was stupid. That was a bad decision, right? Tired cops are dangerous. Tired pilots are dangerous. Yeah, sometimes you're going to have to suck it up and push through. Sometimes there's a crisis, right? But if you're constantly sucking it up and pushing through, something is wrong. If your employer is constantly pressuring you to suck it up and press through because they're not sufficiently staffing, that's a them problem. Right? At some point, you don't want to make it a you problem.
Yeah, and this is something I record this episode at a time in my life where I'm living with some of this, right? Like I'm approaching a point in my career where I'm probably going to have to make a really tough choice and step away from some of the things that I love doing, because I know that in my life situation that I'm in these days, something's got to give. So believe me when I tell you that I understand, I get it. And particularly lately, like work has been busy. My dog has been doing really well. And we've had a lot of really cool experiences lately, and I don't want to leave doing what I do. Like I love what I do, but this is part of the reality that we have to face at some point. And at this point in my career, where I know that at some point I'm going to have to step back, I have to remind myself to put my money where my mouth is when I talk about this stuff, especially when I frame it through that lens of like, I want to be around to do stuff with my kid when he gets older, right? Like I want to make it, I want to have a retirement. I don't want to just, this is not all there is to life, is just to be the cop for 20, 30 years and that's it, right? So I respect and I appreciate how difficult that can be, but have that like sober view of those things and look at the big picture and get your priorities right. Now, we use sleep as an example of this, but we haven't even touched on a bunch of other stuff, right? The incidence of things like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, substance abuse, suicide, all the things that come just from the work itself and the inherent exposure to all the critical incidents and the trauma, whether that's a big critical incident like a capital T trauma, or just all the cumulative little things that add up over the years, right? Or all the chronic health issues, back problems, hip problems, knee problems. And it doesn't matter if you just think you're good, right? Everyone thinks that they're like, oh, that applies to those people that live in a different way, but like I'm the exception to the rule, right? No. Like if you think that you're just some exception and that you're not going to be defined by a statistic, I hate to be the guy that breaks it to you, but like that's not how the math works. These jobs will literally take years off of your life. They are bad for your health. And not like maybe they're bad for you. It's becoming more and more established, right? It's sort of like partying and smoking and drinking.
Well, we're also always trying to look for some like big environmental factor. In the military, like everything is the burn pits or the earplugs that we had 20 years ago, or whatever,
yeah,
right?
The 3M thing.
The 3M earplugs. Like, yeah, the burn pits were a problem and they probably did cause a lot of cancer, but that's not the only reason veterans are imploding. Right? A lot of it is just this. They're just not taking care of themselves, and they didn't for 10, 20, 30 years.
And the thing is like it's one thing if you're just kind of a product of the environment, right? But about going back to what I said earlier about like not being just a passenger, taking ownership of it and recognizing that like we know this stuff is bad for you. We know that your job is bad for you. In fact, part of the reason that if you at the end of the day, if you think about the big picture, we actually get paid pretty well to do the things that we do for the most part. We actually get pretty good retirement systems, pretty good benefits, all those things. And a lot of it is because there is some acceptance for the fact that we know this stuff is bad for us. But at the end of the day, like we still think of it like, well, it's like partying and smoking and drinking. We know it's bad for us, and a lot of us do it anyway. Like,
hell yeah.
That's problematic, right? So if you want to grow old and still be healthy and capable and watch your kids grow up, get your priorities right. And that means being willing to take a step back from a workplace that is well established to be toxic and unhealthy for you.
Yeah, consider we did an episode back in the day called Tactical Personality, right? Talking about the traits that we look for in SEALs or Special Forces guys or SWAT guys or cops or pilots. And a theme from that was that our communities tend to attract and recruit the types of people who will do exactly this, right? We need that. We need those traits, but we need them set at like an 8 out of 10 and not a 12 out of 10. One of my favorite jokes is like, behaviors that we would literally medicate in kids, we reward in adults, right? Being super obsessive is not a good behavior in an 8th grader. We would medicate that, but it might get you a partner in a law firm.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got some really perverse incentives and like habits. that got you success in your 20s are going to hurt you in your 30s. That's one of the things I'm trying to communicate here. So at some point, I want you to go home. Like literally go home, log off of the computer, go home, be with your family, be with your kids. And if you can't be with your family, with your kids, that's a clue, right? And also when you go home, if you feel, it's good to feel a sense of ownership and responsibility for your organization and for your job. I certainly do. I know Mike does. But the place is not going to burn down if you go home or if you take a couple days off. And if it's going to burn down, you've probably done something wrong, right? There needs to be enough continuity among the staff and the procedures that you can step away. Or if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, the place will still function, right? That's part of the resilience of an organization you have to build in.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed over the years, and I've been guilty of this myself, but I've noticed that a lot of people will make it a point of pride to like brag about how their leave balance is maxed out.
That is gross.
Or it's like a point of pride about how much overtime. Oh, I got this many hours overtime on my paycheck. F that, dude. Like, use your leave. It's there for a reason. Use it. And try to work overtime on your terms and not theirs. It's one thing if, certain assignments are going to require it. I understand that, but like work the overtime on your terms. If you're saving up for a house or a boat or a vacation, that's one thing, but don't do it because you feel somehow enslaved by your job or by your boss. That's a problematic behavior to watch out for. And if you feel like you must go to every opportunity to work extra, reflect on that, because I think it's problematic.
Yeah. One of the terms that has come up a lot in the last couple of years is burnout. And I kind of hate that word because it doesn't mean anything by itself. It kind of means whatever you want it to mean. So I want you to think of burnout as mostly a decision point. If at any point you would describe your situation as like, man, I feel burnt out, I want you to stop and be like, am I staying at my job because of pride and ego? Am I staying at my job because I need the money? Am I staying because I love it? And I just don't love the term burnout. I think it's too vague to do much with. So what I want you to do is try to nail down what exactly you're feeling when you feel burnt out. Do you feel anxiety? Are you anxious and concerned? Do you feel fatigued? Are you tired? Do you feel straight up PTSD? Are you like weirdly anxious or triggered by certain things? Or are you just recognizing that your family life is deteriorating? That you're getting snippy with your family's getting snippy with you. You don't have the relationship you want with your spouse. You don't have the relationship you want with your kids. Those are clues, but again, that kind of circles back to that's your clue that you need to make a decision.
Yeah, I think these are really important questions to ask yourself. And burnout as a decision point is a good distinction because it's easy to like just be in the moment and feel the things that you're feeling. But what to do with it is the important part, right? The goal obviously is to avoid burnout, but you have to recognize that there's a gradient. You don't just like burn out one day and that's it. You kind of slope that way. And the goal here is to recognize when you're starting to fall down that slope and then be intentional to prevent it from getting to a point that causes bigger problems. Not just in your job performance, but also like some of the second and third order effects like Jim is talking about, right? Like stuff with your family. Are you getting short-tempered at home? Are you feeling irritable? Are you anxious or tired all the time? Those are those times where you've got to take that step and kind of remove yourself from it in a sense and take some initiative and positive control of how you're doing in life. And we mentioned using your goddamn leave, and I think that's a big one, but I also want to talk about a couple other strategies because I know a bunch of you guys and gals listening to this are hard chargers and you're not going to leave the team and you're not going to quit working overtime just because we said so. I know because I get it and I've been there. So I want to give you some things to think about. One of the big ones, I think, is boundary setting. It's a funny thing about boundaries, and I learned this the hard way in life, or many hard ways probably, setting a boundary doesn't mean telling somebody, hey, if you do X, I'm going to do Y, right? It's not a threat. That's not the same thing as a boundary, right? And then you just expect their compliance. Boundaries are for you. Boundaries mean telling yourself that if X happens, this is how I will respond. And that's where you have to catch control of that gradient. If you start to burn out and you say, hey, I'm feeling a certain way, and so I need to take some time off or plan a trip or do a hobby or whatever, right? It's telling yourself that if X happens, I'm going to do Y. And it means holding yourself accountable. Part of that is just expectation management, right? When you're enthusiastic about work, which a lot of us are, you get stuff done on your off-duty hours, on your own time, or at your own expense. And when you do that all the time, you condition your bosses to expect it. So these days, there are times where my phone goes off during the day when I'm not working, or an email comes through that, I happen to see because I check. Shame on me. Why am I checking my email when I'm not at work, right? But I happen to check and I see an email and I feel like I need to respond, right? And I've gotten a lot better over the years at letting that sit until I log on for my shift. And recognizing that I can respond to those things during work hours. I don't have to jump at every opportunity to work, especially when I'm not working, right? And what I've learned is that the people at work are usually fine with that. They don't always expect an immediate response, but we convince ourselves that we have to get right on it because we're the hard charger, right? That we're enthusiastic or whatever. And one of those boundary setting things, it turns out, has nothing to do with them. They don't care. Like they sent the email or the text message or whatever when it was convenient for them. And if you want to get to that another time, that's probably fine. Right? And if they do expect a response.
One thing I want to jump in on this, and maybe you're about to say this, but if you're a supervisor, have some empathy, right? If you're going to message someone when it's convenient for you to message them on their personal cell phone, maybe put the caveat, hey, it was convenient for me to send it right now. You don't need to action this right now. Hit me up when it's convenient, right?
Well, sure. But also, on your own end of it, right? Taking control and ownership of the things that are in your power to control. One of the boundaries that you can set and the ways that you can respond is responding in such a way that says, hey, would you like me to handle this when I start my shift next Wednesday at 6 p.m.? Or is there an overtime code I should be using when I work on this? Right? And understanding that like I'm off duty right now and I can do this next week or next, after my days off, or I can do this on overtime. And how do you want me to handle that? And usually what you'll find is like, oh yeah, like Wednesday's fine, like no rush. It's not a big deal. But the point is in all of that is it falls on you to manage well. And wouldn't it be nice if your bosses had all the empathy and all of that? Yeah, great. But
let me know when you get one.
Right. At the end of the day, it falls on you to enforce those boundaries. It's about how you respond to those things, right? The same is true for working extra hours. Overtime is over. It's over. Your normal working week has ended. It's extra hours, extra time. And yes, there are positions and assignments out there that are going to require overtime and call outs and things like that, but you still get a vote in how much you can give. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make with all of this is it's not on your boss to monitor how well you're sleeping at night or to check in on your mood or your work-life balance and how things are with your family or whether or not you've had an opportunity to decompress. You might have to speak up and deal with some of that yourself. And sure, I would hope that they care and that they respect all those things, but it is your job to take care of yourself. And this is part of that personal responsibility. Just like you want to do your job well, it's important to you to be a professional and to excel and to be a go-getter. And I admire that. But you have to recognize that being able to perform at the highest level also means having this balance that we're talking about.
So I mentioned the perspective of a supervisor, right? And like you want to have some empathy for your subordinates. This is a kind of a key question in leadership, is how into your subordinates' business do you need to be? Do you need to crawl all over them about what's their family situation? How much sleep are they getting? Did they eat? And there are absolutely some military organizations and leaders who are all about that. I hate it when people do it to me. Like, lead me less. I'm a professional. I can handle myself, right? Drives me nuts. And so to me, when I'm dealing with my subordinates, I make a big point of I treat them like grown-ass adults, and I don't get into their business. But the trade-off there is I need subordinates who are honest and clear-eyed and mature about their limitations, right? I need them to go home when I tell them to go home, because I know sometimes I'm going to need them to stay late. And I need that to be okay. Okay. I need followers who can pace themselves, because I need them to be able to sprint when the crisis hits. And I work in a segment of the military that absolutely crises hit and we got to go, right? Some communities get super rules based about that. In transportation, especially like train operators, airlines, truckers, they have very firm rules about how long their days can be, right? In military aviation, we have all kinds of rules about crew duty day and crew rest, and we take a lot of crap for that from our sister services and specialties. But there are good reasons for those rules. You don't want a loopy pilot ever, and you really don't want a loopy pilot trying to land a stealth bomber in crappy weather. Those things are expensive, okay? And in some communities, we need you a little bit more flexible about how you apply rules. We've talked about that in a lot of episodes, right? But if you're going to get flexible with the rules, you need to augment that with a whole lot of maturity and judgment. Where we get into problems is when guys go cowboy when they don't need to go cowboy, right? And we hire people who are prone to do that. So you as a supervisor, you have to kind of work the throttle on that.
I think the main point that I want to take in here when it comes to boundary setting and stuff like that is understanding that, to Jim's point, is we want people who are willing to speak up and know their limitations. And a lot of that boils down to you having your own humility to say, hey, like, I'm struggling a little bit right now, right? And instead of just pushing on, and there becomes this stigma of like, you know, when they're like, hey, who could stay? We have another op. Like, no one wants to be the guy that raises their hand. And it's recognizing that every member of the team is in a different situation, right? Some of them were able to sleep the night before. Some of them didn't start as early as the others. Some of them, frankly, are just younger or in a better position to stay late.
And this gets you real resent in big parts of the military, is like, we always make the single guys do it, right? Right. And then we end up riding them way harder than we ride the guys who are married and have kids, or the single parents, that kind of thing. And man, I wish I had a magic answer to that. But if you're the guy who always needs to go home, who always has a limitation, maybe you need to do some soul searching about whether the special team, the high commitment jobs, are the right jobs for you.
Well, and that's and therein lies the rub, right? It's like you could take a phrase like that and it becomes kind of a lecture where it's like, maybe you're just not cut out for this, bud. And it's like, well, maybe, and that's okay. Like, it's not going to be for everybody. And it's also something where, like, culturally, we need to make sure that we're taking care of each other and saying that, hey, it's all right if you're not 100% every day. It's not realistic to be 100% every day. It's okay to have a bad day and have an off day. And what I have found is that if I speak up and I'm saying, hey, I'm having this issue at home, or I'm having this issue with sleep, or I'm having whatever, right? That usually people are pretty understanding about that. And I guess where I'm going with that is just that a lot of times we're our own worst enemy. We beat ourselves up more than anybody else. Like, quite frankly, half the time, no one probably realizes if you're there or not. Right? Like, no one's probably going to remember or care if you can't make it on one of the calls or one of the, you know, whatever. Like, for the most part, probably no one cares. Sure, don't be that guy that just sandbags all the time, but don't be afraid to take some time off either, and to take a step back if you need to. So just have good boundaries for yourself and figure out where you want to draw those lines in the sand, because I think, to Jim's point about like being mature about it, is recognizing that your bosses aren't going to do it for you. There's no way they can keep track on how you're feeling, right? There's not a mood tracker like for every guy on the team or every pilot on the field or whatever. Like, you need to speak up. And if you're at 60% that day, hey, I could be the gear guy, I could be the command post guy maybe, but like I'm not 100%, I'm not feeling good, or I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. Own it. It's okay. And what you'll find, I think, if we create a culture of that where everyone helps each other out, we're all going to be better off in the long run. So kind of related to boundary setting, another strategy I want to talk about is context switching. And part of this, we talked about like using your leave and like going home, right? A little bit of it has to do with leaving work at work. And I also think that this is a big element of managing stress and processing trauma and regulating your mood. And on the wellness front, we've talked about the importance of things like having good outlets and hobbies and getting outside and a physical fitness thing, and like all of that is good and important, right? And where this fits into the work-life balance side of things is being able to mentally switch gears, right? To switch off from work mode to relax mode or family mode, dad mode, or whatever, right? And having a routine can really help. And for some people, that routine might just be the process of like, this is how I get home, come in the door, get all my gear, my uniform off, whatever. And that routine will kind of decompress and help you kind of switch gears. Sometimes that's enough, right? But sometimes you might need a little bit something extra. And maybe that's a shower. Maybe that's squeeze in a workout or go for a walk or walk the dogs, right? Go for a run. Maybe it's 5 or 10 minutes of like stretching or mindfulness or just alone time. I think all the cool kids nowadays are doing like a cold plunge. It's like all the fad, whatever. Like I don't care what you do, but having some happy place or some thing that you can do to kind of venture out for a minute and subconsciously trigger or remind yourself that work is over. Whatever stress is at work will still be waiting for you at the office tomorrow. But you're home now. You can forget about it. You're in a safe place. Now it's time to be the dad or the husband or the human or whatever that you intend to be outside of work. And I think this also applies to when you go to work. At the end of the day, one of our big goals with Tactical Tangents is to help you be the best, most elite performer that you can be, right? The best tactician, the best pilot, the best cop, paramedic, whatever it is that you do. We want you to be switched on and we want you to be in the fight, right? And taking care of yourself at home is one side of that. But also when you go to work, having those routines and things that you can do to kind of get in the zone and in the right headspace to be present and switched on, this can all help with that too. So think about context switching and how you can kind of get yourself either wound up or wound down appropriately. And then one of the last things that I want to hit on when it comes to this work-life balance stuff is to think about all the things that you can do at work to regulate the stuff that's bad for you. And one of my pet peeves that spreads like cancer in almost any workplace, it doesn't matter what kind of job you do, right, are those like toxic behaviors, the gossip, the shit talk, the bad attitudes, people who are cynical, right, just about everything. They're negative about the management, they're negative about the clients, they're negative about the customers, they're whatever it is, right? We did a leadership episode a little while back where we talked about how attitudes are contagious. And we're all going to get salty from time to time. There's always going to be a time and a place where we have to vent a little bit. We get pissed off, fired up. We got to blow off some steam, and that's okay within reason, right? But if you find yourself always sitting around the water cooler, so to speak, at work, and people just want to bitch and complain about the bosses or another unit or another agency or fucking politics or whatever, back to boundary setting, feel free to excuse yourself. Hey, the minute politics come up, I'm going to walk away, You don't have to put on a fucking parade about it. You don't have to tell your friends and your coworkers like, hey, just so you know, if you bring up politics, I'm going to leave. All you have to do is just say, hey, you know what? This kind of shit's not great for me. And just to yourself, when that shit comes up, hey, I'm going to run to the bathroom. I'll be right back. And just walk away. Excuse yourself.
Or wade right into the middle of it and be like, well, actually.
But, you know, and to that point, like if you are going to participate, then push back a little bit, but in a way that is a source of positivity, right? Like, don't let it consume you. I hate that. People get so fired. I was on a run the other day, and there was a bicyclist that passed me on this running path. And as I'm running past, he screams out loud, "Trump is a traitor." And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, okay. And I don't care how you feel about it either way, because I'm not going to let that ruin my day or make my day or anything. But the fact that people feel that is where they're at, that they're on a bike ride and that's what they're raging about the whole time. Like, all right, maybe just let that go, right? Don't let it consume you. I know that we're all, from time to time, we're all going to be guilty of it. But at the end of the day, those attitudes are not helping anybody. You can't control a lot of the things that people bitch about. So try to be a leader in your little sphere of influence and control the things that you can. Have an input on the things that you do have a say in. Check on your friends, reach out, talk about the things that are stressful, cope with them in a healthy way, encourage each other to get outside or to take time off. Maybe that's like, if you see a dude that needs to take a day off and he's not doing it, do it with him. Like, hey, Jim, you want to go for a hike next week? Dude, let's burn some leave and go climb Mount whatever. Fuck it. Let's go out. Let's go try to, or go fishing or whatever it is that you do. Right? Be vulnerable, open up. Like, we talk about work-life balance, but the truth is these things are all interconnected. And I think it's worth pointing out that it's not just work and life and that's it. There are not only two things in life. It's maybe forget the work-life side of it. Just call it balance, like period. Just balance. It's not just something that you find once and then you're good. You have to constantly try to maintain it. There's always that give and take. You're making little adjustments along the way. Sometimes they're big adjustments. Sometimes they're small adjustments. But you need to try to live and work in such a way that is in harmony with the person and the vision that you have for yourself in life at the end of the day. So I think that's all I got on my soapbox, Jim.
Ooh, that was good. Some smart person recently said to me, life is the sum total of what you choose to pay attention to. And I have tried to get more deliberate about what is worth my attention on any given day. My kids are worth my attention. My wife is worth my attention. Funny memes are worth my attention. Shout out to Chief Pete. I want you to be deliberate about how you structure your life. You get to choose. You get to choose your own adventure, right? Like, do you want to be an action guy forever? And I understand that. I totally understand that drive. But I want you to think about, like, when you're 30, what that's going to mean. And when you're 40, what that's going to mean. And if you already have a wife and kids, what that's going to mean for them. Or a husband and kids, or whatever and kids.
Well, and how depressed are you going to be when the unfortunate time that comes, and it will come, that you don't get to be the action guy anymore? It's gonna happen. And like, how much of your identity and happiness and joy is going to be taken from your life? And this is part of recognizing the sprint versus the marathon thing, right? If you recognize that it is you have to pace yourself, then maybe the reward there is the longevity, right? Like I've been on, there's only 2 guys on my team that are peers, like at the operator level, if you want to call it that, that have been on the team longer than I have. Like in terms of tenure, like I've held on for a lot longer than a lot of my peers. And I recognize that some of my ability to have lasted as long as I did is because I knew when to take a step back and when to slow down, right?
I want you to pace set, and pace setting is contextual, right? Know when you're in a sprint, know when you're in a marathon, and you can't stay in a sprint forever. And at some point you need a GTFO. You need to get the hell out. Get out of the building. Get out of the police car. Just get outside. Get out of the skiff. When I think about structuring my life, right? This is very personal for Mike. This is maybe our most personal episode that we've done, right? Because this has absolutely impacted me, and this has absolutely impacted Mike, and it continues to. And we're both in positions where we're going to have to make decisions. I am more than 21 years now in active duty. Outlive, outlast. I think they just stopped paying me like 5 years ago. I still show up. And I love it. I really do. And I've had many opportunities to leave at this point. I have made a deliberate choice that I'm willing to put up with the bullshit, and man, there's a lot of bullshit. But honestly, that is liberating. That I have chosen to stay, right? And that changes how I look at it. And when I think about what I'm going to do next, because I'm going to need to do something next, right? Soon. I think about all the things that were available to me, right? Should I go to another government agency? Should I go to law school and be a lawyer? It's the family business. It's what we do. Should I be a Walmart greeter?
Hell yeah, brother.
Should I be a long haul trucker? I don't know. But when I think about, or an airline pilot, right? That's the default for a military aviator in most cases. My wife and I have talked about this a lot, right? And my commanders of various flavors and I have talked about this a lot. And when I think about what happens next for me, I specifically, deliberately want to downshift my workload. So, for example, law school does not sound like a downshift to me. Going to another government agency does not sound like a downshift to me. Even going to the airlines does not sound like a downshift to me. There are parts, I have a lot of friends who fly for the airlines, and most of them love it. Some of them don't. But I know enough about myself, and maybe that's a thing. Like, you got to know yourself and what you need to call your life a success. And that drives my little algorithm for how long I'm willing to stay and at what point I'm going to punch, and how many birthdays I'm willing to miss, and how many baseball games I'm willing to miss, and how many soccer games and jiu-jitsus and Boy Scouting and Girl Scouting. And, let me tell you, like, I didn't have to think about that when I was 22. I think about that all day, every day now. So, situations change. Whatever you end up doing, know that we're cheering you on. We want you safe out there, and we want you smart out there. Good luck. You're going to need it.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. This episode is also brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show, so when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters, that's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.